Hey everyone, building computers 1 or even 2 decades ago was easy. Case fans either had a simple Molex connection that plugged into your PSU, like this, or they were 3-pin fans and you could either plug them into your motherboard or use the Molex adapter and continue to power them via your PSU. Oh, the good old times. But now, everything is PWM this and ARGB that. There's 4-pin fans and 6-pin fans, and then there's daisy chains fans, magnetic fans and interlocking fans. Why did it all get so complicated? Luckily, I'm here. My friends call me Tristan, the fan guru Perry. Actually, no one calls me that, because I don't have any friends. But I do know a lot about PC case fans, so here's everything you need to know. This guide is split into 3 sections. I'll firstly cover any questions that you might have before you go out and buy your case fans. But if you've already purchased them, don't worry, just feel free to skip straight to the second section on the YouTube chapters, because this will cover actually installing your case fans. How to wire them up, cable manage them, how to avoid accidentally overloading your motherboard's fan headers, and all of that fun stuff. I'll then cover some post-install things in the final third section, things like how to check that your fans are working well, and when to clean your fans. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so you're planning your new PC build, or maybe you're just doing some upgrades, and you're not sure which case fans to buy. The first thing you really need to work out is whether you want to go for RGB fans or not. That's because RGB fans look great, of course, but they do require a lot of extra cables. That's because RGB fans have one cable that actually controls the fan speeds, how fast they should run, and another separate cable for the pretty lights. And so this will kind of make your job harder, but of course if you do want some flashy RGB build, and I can't really blame you, you just need to be aware that you will have a little bit of extra complexity here. I'll discuss how to actually connect your fans to your computer later on, but the next factor to consider when buying case fans is the brand of case fans. Now, if you're going for RGB fans, then I'd probably recommend buying from a company like Lian Li, Corsair, NZXT, or Thermaltake, because they all offer solutions for your RGB case fans where you can get an RGB fan hub that takes care of all the pesky extra wiring for you. Lian Li are particularly strong here with their Infinity fans using only a single cable from the RGB fan to the Uni hub, and many of Lian Li's cases actually offer some pretty nice cable management features too, so your cable management doesn't end up looking like this guy's. But if you don't want RGB fans, can you just buy any old make of case fan? Well, no. Ideally, I think you should still stick to a reputable main brand such as Noctua, Arctic, or some of the other companies that I mentioned previously. You don't actually need to spend a fortune here though. I recently actually picked up some Arctic P12 fans, and they cost me just over £5 each. They work out really well too. I actually combine this with an Arctic fan hub, which I'll discuss later on, and my system is ultra quiet most of the time, especially at idle. Noctua fans also offer some really great performance, but this comes at a big cost. Do they really need to be 6 times the price of some other perfectly good fans, for example? There's probably a style premium here, to be honest. Noctua fans have a distinctive style, along with pretty great performance, of course. I actually did purchase a Noctua cooler for my CPU because I like the design, the performance, and the look of it. But for my actual case fans, I just wanted something simple looking that would blend in, meaning black Arctic fans for my black Corsair Carbide 88R case. There are, however, 4 other important things that you should check before buying your case fans. Well, 5 if you count, actually checking the reviews, but it kind of goes without saying that you shouldn't buy some random 2 out of 5 rated fan. The things you should actually check is how fast the fan runs, its RPM in other words, whether the case fan supports PWM, which is pulse width modulation, whether it has daisy chain support, and this can be really useful, and also what type of fan bearing the fan system actually has. So turning back to the RPM rate, this stands for revolutions per minute, and it's literally how many times each minute that the fan will spin round. Boom. The faster the fan spins, the more air can actually get through it. In other words, a 3000 RPM fan will bring more cold air into your case or expel more warm air out than an 800 RPM fan. But the faster they spin, the more noise they make. I typically like fans that have a max RPM of 1800 to 2000. That seems to strike the right balance between effectively cooling your system at peak versus not being too noisy and deafening. Of course, the advertised RPM rate here is just the highest rate that it might run at. If you buy a 4-pin fan, also known as PWM, this will run at a variable fan speed. So when your system is barely doing anything, the fan will spin really slowly and quietly. Fan speeds will then automatically ramp up when you start heating up your computer by gaming, video editing, doing 3D modeling, AI work, or whatever else. Nowadays, I would always actually recommend buying a 4-pin power width modulation fan because they don't really cost any more than the older 3-pin variants, at least in my experience. And you'll have a lot more flexibility of their fan speeds. You can technically change the speeds of your 3-pin fans if your motherboard supports it, which is known as DC control, but I wouldn't really bother with this, to be honest. Just buy a PWM fan and then just move on with your life, in my opinion. The third factor to consider when buying case fans is whether they support daisy chaining or not. I'll get on to how to actually install your fans in the next section, but some fans like the Arctic P12s actually support something known as daisy chaining. This is where each fan cable actually has 2 connectors on it, not just one. This allows you to then connect all your fans together in a chain, and then you only plug the last fan into the motherboard's chassis fan header. This can really help with cable management and is useful because many motherboards only actually have 1 or 2 case fan headers, which doesn't really help much if you have 4 or 5 case fans, of course. Daisy chained fans can be a really nice benefit as a result. Final factor is the design of the fan, or more specifically, its fan bearing system. This is the thing in the middle of the fan that actually helps spin the fan round in a way that minimizes friction and maximizes the fan's performance and lifespan. There are loads of different types of fan bearing systems, and I'll put some further details down in the description because this could be a whole video in itself. But essentially, fluid dynamic bearings or hydraulic bearings are probably worth buying nowadays. They prolong your fan's lifespan and is what many of the higher end fans actually use too. So that wraps up the main factors to consider, but I should also quickly point out your motherboard and your case. If you plan on buying 6 case fans, for example, it's unlikely that your motherboard will actually have 6 separate chassis fan headers, which is where you actually need to plug your fans into. What you'll need to do instead is buy some fan splitters that allows you to actually plug a few fans into the same motherboard header, or you should buy a fan hub. I discussed this point a lot in the next section, but without buying either one of these two, you'll end up with all your computer parts and then realize at the very start of your build that you're stuck because you can't actually power all of your fans. So it is worth considering how you'll actually connect up your fans before you start buying and building the PC parts. Finally, you should double check that your case can actually physically support all of your fans. Most cases support 120mm fans, so make sure that you haven't accidentally purchased 80mm fans or something like that. Equally, some higher end PC cases actually support 140mm fans, and so it's worth buying some of these because they actually can move a lot more air into your system or out of it while running at a slower speed, meaning the computer then runs cooler, but it's also quieter, which is pretty nice. I should also quickly point out that just because your case has space for 15 case fans, it doesn't actually mean you must buy 15 case fans. So do think carefully about how many fans you actually need. Remember that you can always go out and buy more later. You could start off with just 2 intake fans and 2 exhaust fans and only buy more if you need to. Or, you could spend almost $500 on 15 Corsair RGB fans and 2 fan hubs if you'd like. Both options work fine. Okay, so you have your case fans. Congrats! So, how do you actually install them? And why are there just so many wires? Well, the first thing you'll actually need to decide is the orientation of your fans. Fan blades have a particular curve shape because in one direction they'll actually draw air in through them. Basically, they'll act as an intake and bring fresh air into your PC case. In the other direction, they'll actually blow hot air out, and we call these exhaust fans. Many fans actually have little arrows on them to show which direction the fan will blow. But if it doesn't have this, just check the manual of your fans or simply plug the fans in, as I'll discuss in a second, and put a bit of tissue paper near them and actually see if the fans blow the tissue away or suck it into the fan. This is important to know because a healthy PC build will usually have some exhaust fans and some intake fans. Basically, you want a constant supply of cold air from your room via your intake fans, and then any warm air from your CPU and GPU that get really hot will then be expelled out of your case through your exhaust fans. Some people disagree with this and actually even recommend having all exhaust fans to permanently blow all air out of your case, and this is known as a negative pressure setup. But the majority of people actually prefer having some exhaust fans and some intake fans, so that's what I'll cover in this video. Right, now the location of the exhaust and intake fans is crucial. You can't just randomly have intake and exhaust fans all over the place next to each other, for example. I tend to recommend that because hot air rises, it's best to have the front case fans and any bottom ones act as intakes to bring in new air, and then the back and the top fans should actually act as exhausts. This also ensures a constant supply of air through the case, and is probably the most popular way of actually configuring your fans. With that decided, how should you actually connect your fans to the case? I mean, they usually come with little simple metal screws, and aren't they good enough? Well, yes, in many cases screws are actually fine. But if you add super fast 3000 RPM fans, for example, it might actually vibrate around too much to just use the little screws. As a result, some people rely on anti-vibration screws, basically little rubber sticks, instead of using metal screws, because these rubber screws will actually dampen any vibration noise. It's up to you though, and modern fans are actually quite quiet and they minimize vibrations by their design. So I'd probably just stick with screws to begin with and see how you get on. Okay, so at this point you can actually mount your fans onto your case, and then you're left with the simple task of wiring everything up. Joy! If you simply have one case fan, and you purchased it in the last decade, your job is easy. just find the 3 or 4 pin fan header on your motherboard and plug the fan into there. Usually the header is labelled as CHA fan, meaning chassis fan, or it might just say fan 1 or similar, but do double check your motherboard's manual or online instructions if you aren't sure. Since you plugged into the motherboard, you're done. Thanks for watching this video. But of course, it's not that easy. We don't just have one fan, we often have 5, 6, or even more. You might also have an RGB fan which has 2 cables, one for the fan header, of course, but also the other go into your motherboard's RGB fan header slot. To make matters worse, many motherboards only have 1 or 2 fan and RGB headers to actually plug our fans into. So what do? Well, there's 3 main options. You can buy fan splitter, you can buy daisy chain fans, or you can look at a fan hub. In some ways, these first 2 options are actually very similar to each other, but let's look at Y splitters first. These have a single end that will actually plug into your motherboard, and then there are 2 or more ends that actually you plug your fans into. This means that if you had a 6-way splitter, you could actually plug 6 fans into this, and then plug this 1 bit into your motherboard's fan header, right? Well yes, physically that would work, but many motherboard fan headers can supply up to 1 amp of power. Some fans do only use minimal amounts of power, so you might technically be able to split this into 6 or 7 fans and then plug this into your motherboard fan header. However, this is really pushing it. General advice is only to plug 2 or 3 fans into a motherboard header via a splitter. This means that if you have 6 case fans, you should actually have 2 fan splitters and then plug them into 2 separate motherboard fan headers. The same is true for the LED light aspect. You can purchase a RGB splitter cables, for example, that allows you to plug multiple RGB cables ultimately into the same motherboard RGB header. You should continue to avoid plugging too many fans into the same RGB header though, for the same reasons that I mentioned. But you should always check your motherboard specs for the total output on that particular RGB header, and then calculate things accordingly. Using splitters can actually work fine, but some fans actually have daisy chain support. This is where they have 2 ends to their cables. One end plugs into your motherboard's fan header as normal, but you can actually instead choose to use the other end of the fan cable and actually plug this into your next fan's cable. This chains the fans together, and then you get rid of the need to have separate fan splitters. It also makes cable management a bit easier because you haven't got Y splitters everywhere and they're not exactly pretty. The other option of powering your fans is via a fan hub, and I'll discuss this more in a minute. But I firstly wanted to cover a few questions that people might have about their motherboard fan headers. So many motherboards actually have 4-pin headers, and as I mentioned earlier, this gives you more control of your fan speeds due to PWM. But what happens if you purchased a 3-pin fan by mistake? Or you just have a really old fan? Well, this is actually fine, sort of. You can plug it into a 4-pin header, you just won't have the PWM fan control. The fan will probably just run at full speeds, to be honest. Equally, if your motherboard only has 3-pin fan headers, but you have 4-pin fans, you can also plug these fans into your motherboard okay. Essentially, the fan's plug will just overhang the motherboard's header a little bit because one of the pins is unused, but this won't cause a major problem apart from the fact that the fans will again run at max speeds. This is all true for splitters or adapters too. You can actually purchase 4-pin down to 3-pin fan adapters, for example, which will act as a splitter in some cases, but it'll also downgrade your 4-pin fans down to 3-pin fans, which makes it easier to plug these into your older motherboard or an older fan hub. Before I discuss fan hubs, there's one other quick point I wanted to mention. You might have noticed that when you have a 4-pin splitter, only one of the ends actually has 4 pins, all the rest have 3 pins. This isn't a faulty cable though, it's actually by design. The tack signal is the thing that actually helps control the PWM fan speeds, and only one of these is passed to the motherboard, essentially. So a 4-pin splitter will always have one true 4-pin end to pass on the tack signal, and then the rest will just be 3 pins. Okay, so with all that said, you could approach your fan's cable management by using a ton of different splitters or daisy-chained cables, but this will quickly resemble Medusa's hair after a nap. It just won't be pretty. That's where fan hubs come in, and these are sometimes mandatory for RGB fans due to all the extra wires that are required, but they're often actually fairly useful for standard fans too. Fan hubs will allow you to run all of the fan cables to them, and then you plug each 3 or 4-pin fan plug into the fan hub. This might look a bit messy, but you can always hide this at the back of your case behind your motherboard tray. Once you've plugged all the fans into the hub, you can then just run a single fan header wire from your fan's hub to the motherboard. This means you then don't need to worry about having Y splitters everywhere, and also trying to plug wires into a chassis fan header that might be located in a really awkward spot within your case. Now, you might be wondering how you can plug 10 fans into a fan hub when I've said a bunch of times already that the fan header on your motherboard has limited power output. Well, that's where SATA power actually comes in. The SATA wire from your power supply unit isn't just for old style hard drives and SSDs. It also allows us to power peripherals like this extra USB hub at the front of my case, but it also powers the Arctic fan hub. Some fan hubs actually accept a standard SATA power plug like this one, while others actually need a smaller SATA 12-volt connection, in which case you need to buy one of these SATA adapters and plug one end into the PSU SATA cable and the other into your fan hub. Either way though, this extra SATA power actually gives the fan hub everything it needs to run loads of case fans. And that's pretty awesome. That's what makes fan hubs just so nice. Then when you need to come to control your fan speed, as I'll explore in the next section, you just have a single thing to control. It's just so much easier. Everything I've said so far applies to standard fan hubs, but also RGB fan hubs too. There's really only two differences that I can think of. Firstly, RGB fan hubs will have more wires everywhere, and also secondly, RGB fan hubs are essentially mandatory because they're often tied to specific RGB fans. In other words, you can't buy RGB fans from loads of different companies and expect them to magically work with your single Corsair RGB fan hub. For example, if you go with one Corsair RGB fan, you're then kind of tied into Corsair from that point onwards. Unless of course you have some Corsair RGB fans and then some normal fans too. And then you can do whatever you want with those other standard fans. Plug them into a 4-pin Y splitter, and then into a 4-way 3-pin splitter, and finally into a fan Molex adapter that then plugs into your PSU. That will work. Heck, it will actually work, but it naturally wouldn't be a great idea. So that pretty much wraps up this section. I wanted to wrap up with some advice about cable management. Even if you use a fan hub, you'll still have lots of wires all around your case. It's often best to try and tuck any little fan wires behind other fans or behind your motherboard tray, or along the edge of it. This will make them effectively hidden when you're looking through the window of your case. You might also want to use cable ties, especially behind your case, to tidy up all of the fan wires. I often bundle them together and often clip them onto the case via the small hooks or hoops that these cases often have. Before wrapping up this section, there's one other cable management point I wanted to discuss. Before you run any of your fan wires, you should actually double check where your motherboard's fan headers are located. My Asus motherboard has one in the middle of the board, and another sandwiched awkwardly between my graphics card and my power supply unit. For simplicity, it would have probably just been easier to run my fan hub's 4-pin cable to this middle one, but that would have actually looked quite messy even if it was a black wire and a black motherboard. So I actually opted to remove my graphics card entirely so that I could then access this hidden away chassis fan header, because this led to the cleanest wiring setup. In other words, try and plan out exactly where your fan wires will run before you install everything, but please don't worry too much if you get it wrong, because it's easy to actually change all of this later on. With your fans installed, you can finally boot up and see all your fans spinning. Nice. But if they aren't spinning after booting up, don't worry, it's almost certainly the case that either the fan header isn't fully plugged into the motherboard header, or the fan's hub SATA power cable isn't fully plugged in. Double check these and then try booting up again, and they should hopefully run fine. At this point, boot up into Windows, and I would probably then run hwinfo and click Sensors Only and then Start, which will show you a bunch of data. Scroll down until you see the motherboard section, and towards the bottom of that, there should be one or more entries there for chassis fans. This will tell you how quickly they're running, and at idle they might run at under 1000 RPM. But once you start using your system for gaming, video editing, or whatever, you'll then probably see the fan speeds actually ramp up. That's because the CPU and GPU in your computer are heating up, and the sensors in your PC will detect this and tell your fans to run faster, so the more cold air is brought in through the intake fans, and then more warm air is expelled via your exhaust fans. That's all great, but some motherboards actually have quite harsh fan curves. A fan curve is basically how quickly your fan should run, based on your PC's internal temperatures. Some systems will run your fans at 100% speed, which is really noisy, even when your CPU is only at 70 degrees Celsius or so. That's not really ideal, especially because CPUs can run a lot hotter than that. And that's where fan control software comes in, because these allow you to actually change your fan speeds. There are a bunch of ways of doing this. Your motherboard might come with software for it, like the Asus Armoury Crate, that actually allows you to set your fans to be quiet, in other words, running at a low RPM rate, or at max speeds, for example, to cool down your PC more. There's also software out there like SpeedFan, and this can work fairly well, especially because it can automatically control your fan speeds if you choose this, or you can actually take manual control of your fan speeds. But right now I think that fan control is probably the best option open to all of us. It's entirely free and you download it from their website as normal, but as part of the install process it might also prompt you to download some extra packages from Microsoft's official website. That's fine, you can just install them. Once everything is installed, the fan control software will then perform a full calibration process where it works out exactly what fans your computer has, and it then sees how they can best be controlled. It does this by setting them to 100% fan speeds and then slowly lowering the speed down and seeing how your computer's temperatures actually react to this. It then decides the best operating speed for them. However, you can override this and choose manual fan speeds, or you can create customized fan curves that will ramp up fan speeds according to certain temperature points. Fan Control is a pretty awesome bit of software and it's entirely free, so it's definitely worth checking it out. Before finishing off, there's 2 other quick points that I needed to discuss: how to prevent and clean dust buildup off your fans, and when to actually change your fans entirely. Some PCs actually have little grills or filters on the outside of your case, and these help to prevent dust from getting through your fans and then ultimately inside your PC. These can work out well, but if your case doesn't have them, you can either buy third-party ones or just leave them off and see if dust is actually a real problem for you. Some parts of the world have a lot more dust than others, plus environmental factors like whether there's a smoker in the household can also contribute to any dust buildup. If you do end up adding dust filters though, you should probably actually leave them off your exhaust fans at the back and top of your case. It's often best to just add filters to your intake fans because this is where the dust is actually coming from. It's being sucked into your case. In terms of cleaning dust off your fans, it's not really difficult. Turn your PC off and open up your case. If you can easily touch the blades, just get a cloth or similar and just wipe the dust off. However, you can't always quite reach the fans, and in this case, a can of compressed air can work wonders. Just point it at your fan blades and it'll blow all the dust away. And now, the final point of this video. When should you change your fans? Well, I actually covered this in detail in another video, where I also pulled off all the fins for some reason. But case fans can actually last for well over a decade. So I would only really change them if you wanted a new style or colour theme in your case. Or if a particular fan starts making loads of rattling noise, that's then a sign that the fan's bearing is shot and there's no simple fix for this, just buy a replacement fan. And that wraps up this video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please click the thumbs up button and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.